let me begin first by introducing myself and greeting you first with Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. My name is El Farouk Kaki. I go by he, him pronouns, and I am located in Toronto in the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. My family is from Tanzania, and we left in the early 70s after we got independence. My dad was part of the independence movement, and with independence, we got a one-party democracy. And one-party democracies look frighteningly like dictatorships. And the people who helped bring about change and independence were also power brokers who could potentially disrupt the new regime. And so my father was among those folks, and some of his colleagues got disappeared for a bit, and others left, and we were among the ones that were fortunate to be able to leave. And so we eventually came to Canada via England. Somehow England was always the center of the British colonial world, and so we ended up there for a few years without any long-term formal status. And so what pays my bills these days is my work as a refugee lawyer. And so even though we didn't come to Canada as refugees, we were refugees. We had to flee for our safety. We were displaced people. And so now in my paying job, I am a lawyer and I represent refugees of all kinds, but my practice particularly focuses on LGBTIQ2 people and women fleeing gender violence, as well as about 15 to 20% of my client base is HIV positive. So back in the 1990s, when I started representing these kinds of claims, HIV was only a medical issue, not a human rights issue. And so that was a challenge. So here we are today, and I've been asked to speak about the importance of interfaith work and to certainly some context within the Nigeria context. And I'm not Nigerian, and I've never been to Nigeria. And so my comments on that can only be based on my experience. As a refugee lawyer, I have had lots of clients, not only from Nigeria, but throughout. I've had clients from 120 different countries. At the present time in my practice, many of my cases are from Africa. At one time, they were from Latin America, are from Africa, particularly Eastern Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and a sizable number from Nigeria. I am Muslim. I am the co-founder. I started Salam, a lesbian and gay support organization, a support organization for lesbian and gay Muslims back in 1991. And in 2009, I helped co-found the Al Tawhid Juma Circle, the Unity Mosque, which is a gender equal LGBTIQ2 inclusive mosque space. We welcome Muslims and non-Muslims alike, and I can come back to that point about why that's important. My own journey and my understanding of interfaith work and the importance of interfaith work started out very early. So I come from Black Africa. My family is immigrant into Africa from Asia. And so I start out from a minority position. Tanzania is quite pluralistic in terms of its religion. It's about 50% Christian and about 50% Muslim, give or take. And when we talk about interfaith relations, particularly within Africa, we also have to understand the context of colonialism and Europe's role, because some Christianities have a long-term history. Some came at the same time as colonialism, but there was an impetus on some of the colonial powers that this was some kind of a competition. And so oftentimes it wasn't about bridge building and the love that our religions teach, but it was a competition, and not always a healthy competition in terms of saving souls. And I think that we are inheritors of that legacy even today in some parts of the world. even in Africa. When my family moved to England, um, I think I was one of about 5 or 6 kids in my primary school of about 500 kids that were not Christian. There was a couple of Hindu kids, 1 or 2 Sikh kids, a couple of Muslim kids. I think there was a couple of Jewish kids, and that was it. I was the only non-Christian kid who did not have a letter from their parents to excuse them from morning assembly. So every morning for approximately 3 years while I attended school, I attended assembly. I learned my passages from the Bible. I sang my hymns, and had a part in every Christmas play for the time that we were in England. And at one point, my teacher asked me if my parents had a problem, knowing that I was Muslim, if my parents had a problem being in these Christmas plays and so on. And I said to her what my parents had taught me, which is, no, miss, Jesus was a prophet in Islam. There's no problem. And that's the Islam that I was brought up with. That it was no problem. And the reason I think I remained Muslim through my life is that this interpretation, Islam is not a monolith. Just like there is no singular Christianity, there is no singular Islam. If anyone tells you that there is only one Islam around the world and that it is ahistorical and not connected to time and space and culture, then they are sadly mistaken, or they're trying to deceive you, because it is like Christianity, it is a historical and a lived experience. And so the Islam in Nigeria is different from the Islam in Indonesia, is different from the Islam in China or in the Middle East or in Albania. So there's no singular experience of Islam. The Islam that I was taught was a very pluralistic interpretation. Allah in the Quran says, I have sent messengers to all peoples and all prophets at all times. And so the way that came down to me through my parents was that God has sent messengers to all peoples. Only a handful are named in the Quran or in the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But one of the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad tells us that number is like 124,000, and there's others that say 144,000. Whatever the exact number is not really relevant. The point is that there's a lot. And that means, from what that meant for me, is that the divine speaks and has spoken to all peoples throughout human history. And just because I don't recognize the name of your teacher doesn't mean that your teacher was not a teacher and did not bring a message and did not bring a teaching and a learning for people. And so that for me was very, very important in terms of my understanding of Islam and my relationships. So we eventually moved to Vancouver, British Columbia. And my father became involved again in the Muslim community because he was an activist and in politics and so on and so forth. And he eventually became involved with an organization that he became chairman of for a number of years. And it was called the Pacific Interfaith Citizenship Association of British Columbia. And it originally started as an inter-Christian organization to welcome newcomers to the Vancouver area, and then slowly expanded to include non-Christian traditions, and then realized that there was a need for an ongoing conversation, not just in terms of welcoming newcomers, and that the more diverse and the more pluralistic Canada became, the more necessary it was to have these conversations. And I was on a panel a few days ago where I said, I grew up in Canada. When I first came to Canada, nobody knew who Muslims were. They actually didn't know who Muslims were, just like people didn't know what a mango was. In 1974, you couldn't walk into a store in Vancouver, a grocery store, and find a mango. This was, they also didn't know what a Muslim was. And in Vancouver, British Columbia had a historic Sikh population from the Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, and oftentimes people would confuse Muslims with Sikhs. I mean, it still happens today, but the other way, I think. And so on some level, there was a relative ignorance of Islam in Canada and among Canadians. in light of all the things that have happened in the last 30 or so years, I'm not sure that was necessarily a bad place to be. But my father's involvement in Pacific Interfaith led me to brought me to many different places of worship, whether they were Sikh or Buddhist or Hindu or Baha'i or Christian or different brands of Christianity and different interpretations of Judaism. In fact, my first religious celebration in Canada was Purim. When my family arrived in Canada, we stayed with a Jewish family in Toronto for about 2 weeks before we came to Vancouver, and they took us to synagogue, and that was my first religious celebration. And I went to this private Jewish school for a week, and when they took us for hamburgers, my parents said, "But we're Muslim, we don't eat ham," and then found out that in fact in Canada a hamburger was beef. So my family has a long history and a long tradition of interfaith relationships and work and building bridges. I've talked a little bit about the notion of messengers and prophets to all peoples at all times as being part of the universalism that I think is inherent in Islam. There is also a verse in the Quran that is called Surah Kafirun, and my understanding is that the word kafir is misused in both by Muslims and by non-Muslims, because I think it actually refers to people who know the truth but refuse it. And so the people who fought against Muhammad and the believers knew that what they were doing was wrong, but there was an economic imperative and a political imperative for them to stand in opposition of this message of equality and justice. And so they knew and they covered it up. But this verse, it actually says, "To you your beliefs and to me mine." And so at the end of so in other places in the Quran, we're told, engage in conversations with others in the best language, with the best words, right? So I think that is the foundation of how we talk to each other. We all have the golden rule in some way or the other, but part of that golden rule is also how we speak to each other and how we speak about each other. So for example, as a kid growing up, I was never allowed to say anything bad about Jesus or Mary or Moses or any of the prophets, because they're also my prophets. So I was taught that you cannot disrespect. You might not agree with how other people understand or how they practice, but you cannot actually condemn them. So the verse in the Quran, Surah Kafirun, speaks to says basically, to you your way and to me mine. And Muslims are told in the Quran to speak to others in the most beautiful languages. My preliminary sort of scans or my basic scans of some Muslim histories would actually suggest to me that Muslims are more tolerant of non-Muslims than they are of Muslims that have different understandings or interpretations of Islam. What I see so I think interfaith work is really important. It's important in Canada as we continue to develop a pluralistic society where people are affirmed with equality and with love. As a gay man, understanding Christianity, understanding Judaism, and understanding other traditions has not only helped me understand Islam better, but it has also helped me develop a theology of inclusion, not only around religion, but around gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. I think what we are seeing in places in Africa, like in Nigeria, is again the mixture of politics. I think that religion and state need to be separate entities because the marriage of the two is toxic. A politician should never be enforcing what they think is God's law with criminal sanction. And I think that this is where the toxicity comes in many of our traditions, where the power of the state is used to enforce religion, whatever that religion is, but the state, the politics actually usurps the religion, and religion is reduced to a checklist of do's and don'ts. And I think this is something that we're seeing, particularly in the rise of certain kinds of fundamentalisms, and I would say with the rise of certain fundamentalisms within the Muslim tradition in the late 20th and the 21st century. People point to the worst of other people's practices and the best of their beliefs. And so, for example, when we talk about what happened in Afghanistan with the Buddhas, with the Bamayan Buddhas, and I always say that the Buddhas stood 1,000 years of Islam, but they didn't stand 20 years of the Taliban. So for 1,000 years, nobody talked about destroying the Buddhas in a predominantly Muslim country, but the Taliban did it in less than 20 years. So again, Islam is not a monolith, and it is not an ahistorical experience. It's very much a historical and a political experience sometimes. What I see in Africa today is a competition of fundamentalism, and I actually think that LGBT inclusion is actually really about gender and cisgendered heteronormativity. And for there to be a rethinking of theology within those contexts, they have to rethink gender and gender dynamics and power relationships. And I think this is where the resistance in certain religious traditions in contemporary Islam, for example. And I think that colonialism has erased certain practices and certain spaces that used to exist. So I remember reading a book called Allah Made Us Funny, and it's about a community of queer men in Kano in Nigeria, who have been there. Now it's a shrinking number because of there's the intolerance is great, and the intolerance is increasingly violent and has criminal sanction by the state. And I know of the House of Rainbows in Nigeria, started by a friend of mine who had to flee, and so on and so forth. So whether they're Christian or Muslim traditions, there's a sense that Islam is, that religion, these religions are narrow and stand for certain things, that means that certain people are on the inside and certain people are on the outside. And I think that part of the challenge of the interfaith conversation is how we can also enlighten and educate others. And so there's been a lot more theological work of inclusion around sexual orientation and gender identity in some Christian traditions. That has always been very helpful for me in my theology. And I think that if we continue to have these kinds of conversations here, that we can undo our prejudices about each other that we may have as people of faith, because I think that as queer folk and as progressive folk, we cannot replicate, and we should not replicate, the prejudices and the othering that goes on in many of our dominant culture communities. And so what I see in Africa is sort of like a competition of who can be more conservative and who can be more traditional. But this notion of who is traditional and so on and so forth is based on othering others. And so I welcome conversations like this that we can have with each other. I have a 5-minute warning, and I was actually gonna wrap up soon. So, I think that these conversations are really important for us. As a refugee lawyer, I sometimes have clients who will say things who are not Muslim, but who will say, oh, blah, 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 and so, and they come from someplace in Africa where there are Muslims and Christians, and say, oh, well, and so, and he's Muslim, and they're very conservative. But my client is Christian and is telling me about how their family has thrown them out and is like targeting them because they're queer, and yet it doesn't translate in their conceptualization that what they just said, that, oh, they're Muslim and they're that way, can also be said, oh, they're Christian and they're that way. Right? So again, we need to look not just at the best of our intentions and the worst of somebody else's practices. We actually need to look at the whole reality. And I think that interfaith becomes a very important less a very important tool, not just to dissect what we have in common, but also what our differences are. Because I think that that is also very important to understand. As religions, we have a lot of similarities and a lot of overlaps, but we also have certain differences. And this work should not be about dumbing down or dulling those differences, but working also on the commonalities. I was doing my master's in pastoral studies at Emmanuel College, which is a United Church college, and one of the things that I often say in my speeches is we may not always share beliefs, but it is important that we share values. And this is true for couples. I do a lot of interfaith weddings and ceremonies and so on. And for me, what's important is the couple shares values and that they respect each other's paths. And that's for me, and that they have some agreement or some understanding about what that looks like within the context of their relationship and their families. And so if we can do that in our homes, and we can do that in our communities, and we can do that in our countries and in our societies. And I think it's through this dialogue as people of faith, that this dialogue of don't want to say tolerance, because tolerance means I don't really like you, but I'll put up with you. But this dialogue of acceptance around certain theologies can hopefully open up other theologies and into theologies of inclusion. Because when you start dissecting and start building towards inclusion, there is a hypocrisy if you say I want to be inclusive of you but not of you. And I think that in the conversations that we have with others, so people who are other to me and people who are other to you, that we can actually build a house that we can all reside in, inshallah, God willing. I'm happy to take questions. I think I am but 2 minutes under my time, so I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Al-Farouk. That was a really great start to our evening, and I really appreciated hearing about your perspective and your really rich sort of inter-religious background and experiences. So I'm going to...
If I can just sort of, if I can also just say, and I kind of forgot, I mean, my husband not hear that. So, I mean, I've had 2 long-term relationships. My first relationship was with somebody who was an ex-Catholic and whose family was part evangelical and part Catholic, and who eventually came to Islam, but after 15 years, and then and that was never a requisite in our relationship. And my marriage is with somebody who comes from a Baptist background, who chose to come into Islam, but his entire family except for one cousin is all Christian. So I've always, even within my immediate family, I've never had an in-law that was Muslim. But so they've all been Christian of some sort. But you know, so the diversity, and I've actually seen this with many of my clients and people that I know, that a lot of people have very diverse religious affiliations even within family. And if we can love each other that way, then we can also love each other out in our larger human family. So
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite in a moment now Reverend Dave Pollard to speak, and reminder that we'll have a chance to ask all of the speakers' questions at the end. So please keep your questions, take note of them, and we'll have more of a discussion at the end as well. But now, I will invite Reverend Dave Pollard to speak, and I will spotlight you.
Thank you, Bailey. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Yeah. All right. My name is Dave Pollard, and I am the incumbent minister at Fifth Avenue Memorial United Church at downtown Medicine Hat. If you want to know where that is, you can look at a map of Alberta, but I'll tell you we're about 3.5 hours southeast of Calgary, close to the Saskatchewan border to our east, and about an hour from the Montana border. So here in Medicine Hat, we want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you tonight from the traditional territory of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Kainai, the Piikani, the Siksika, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda, and also Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. And so we offer that acknowledgement, and in all things, we seek to live in truth and reconciliation and right relationships with the Indigenous peoples of this land. So my wife, she just took a job about 6 months ago doing some work here in Southern Alberta, supervising folks who have some entry-level positions with a company. And I said, what do you like about it? And she travels. And she said, well, when I go to Lethbridge, there are lots of Filipino people working for the company. And then when I go an hour north to Brooks, the company, the ranks are filled with folks who are from China. And then she said, well, here in our community medicine hat, Serbian people are the primary workforce for this particular company. And so her experience melds with the experience of lots of immigrant communities going back generations in the Prairie West. And my background is in history and political science, and in particular history and settlement of the Prairie West, and even going back to immigrants from Norway and Ukraine. People like to be together when there's diaspora. They like to be together with folks who are from their country, who are culturally or religiously similar, to make that transition to a new country a little easier. This was the case in Northeast Calgary. In the 1980s, there were more and more folks coming from the Middle East. And if you are up in Falcon Ridge in the Northeast in Calgary or other neighborhoods, there are lots of folks from various Middle Eastern countries, and predominantly Muslim. So much so that a number of mosques have been established, and the Ahmadiyya Islamic community actually, just a few years ago, built a very large mosque in Northeast Calgary. And so when folks get comfortable in one spot and they stay for a while, their children and their grandchildren start to move further afield. And this is where my experience of interfaith relations really started to come to a bit of fruition when I was the minister at Airdrie United Church, which is just about 25 minutes north of Calgary, very close to these neighborhoods. And so one day, into my office came a gentleman named Waqar Butt, who was part of the community of prayer that met on Fridays at the local Legion in the club room. And Waqar explained to me that their wish and their desire would be to have a place where they could pray, where alcohol wasn't being served. The Legion was cheap rent, but it was also a club room. And I said to him, well, I've got a hall across the parking lot that Friday afternoons, nobody's in. And for Ramadan, nobody's there. If you wanted to do Tarweeh prayers, by all means. And so we opened up our hall to the Islamic community. And it was interesting because at that time, it was around the year that they built the mosque in the vicinity of the Twin Towers. And there was a lot of consternation about that in some parts in the States and indeed around the world. How dare these Muslims build a mosque so close to the Twin Towers? And so it was also when the TV show Little Mosque on the Prairie was on CBC. And so the headline started to pop up, Real Life Little Mosque on the Prairie at Airdrie United Church. And so the media were very interested in what we were doing, but we weren't doing anything that we hadn't done before, because in our history, we even rented to Baptists. Airdrie was, the United Church was the only church in town. And so when the Catholics came to town, they set up the Stations of the Cross in our sanctuary, worshiped in our building until they built their own. And I'm pleased and happy to say that Airdrie is finally getting its very own standalone mosque after worshiping at Airdrie United Church for almost a decade. So that experience of welcome, I thought, my elders thought, was going to be a great thing. However, when it got widely known, some of our own church members were calling and arguing and saying, "How dare you," leaving nasty messages on our voicemail. We had emails from basically all over the world, Christian people, and I'll use that in quotation marks, saying, "How dare you rent and open up the church to Muslims?" And for me, it wasn't that hard of a stretch to dismiss some of these concerns, because I identify as a first-generation Canadian. My mom, her family emigrated from Ukraine just before the Second World War started. And they were actually ethnic Ukrainians living in Poland. And we all know what happened on September 1st, 1939. So they had just made it out of the potential to lose their lives in the Second World War. They came to Canada and they homesteaded. And my mom tells a story when she was going to school in the one-room schoolhouse. Ukrainian, that language, not allowed. Can't speak it. One day, one of her little sisters got up on a fence post and was tottering and going along the fence post, walking on the rails. And my mom yelled at her in Ukrainian and said, "Get down." The teacher heard her speak Ukrainian, and recess was over. Everyone was marched into the school. My mom was maybe the same age as my daughter, 11, and she was made to stand in front of the class with her hands out and get the leather barber strap, the leather razor strap on her hands 10 times for the sin of speaking Ukrainian in the schoolyard. And she told that story matter-of-factly. But to me, it was just a sign of our sometimes contentious relationship with the other, that any way we can other someone, we try to do it. And we see it in the history of residential schools. We see it in the history of relations with new Canadians. And we really don't know or understand. The teacher didn't ask why you were speaking Ukrainian. It was, you're speaking Ukrainian, you're gonna be punished. And I think we sometimes don't seek understanding of why a cultural or religious group does what they do. And we miss out on some learning when we don't get the facts. And so for me, a relationship with the Islamic community or the Jewish community is just a matter of fact. I don't want to other anybody. I want to include them. And also, being on the prairies, we have a history of prairie practicality. Again, when my parents or my grandparents came, they were Ukrainian Orthodox. There weren't a lot of Ukrainian Orthodox churches near Smoky Lake at that time. So they went to whatever church was coming through town. So they went to Baptist churches and Holy Roller churches and Pentecostal churches. It was just church. And they probably didn't understand a lot because they didn't speak a lot of English at that time, but it was church and they were going. Also, when I was growing up, we had Jehovah's Witnesses for neighbors. And so we knew something of a different religion because of our relationships with our neighbors who lived right next to us. And also, when I was in seminary, I spent some time in India. And when I lived in a city called Ratlam at the Christian hospital compound, the mosque was literally my neighbor. There was a wall for the Christian compound, but right there was the mosque. So the mosque. And so every day I would hear the call to prayer. And as I hung out with the bishop, the imams would come over and sit in his yard and talk and chat. And I said, "So what's up? You have this good relationship with your Muslim neighbors." And the bishop said, "Well, here in India, there's a great affinity between Christianity and Islam, at least where I stand, because of the overwhelming prevalence of the Hindu religion. And so because of size, the Sikhs, the Zoroastrians, the Christians, the Muslims who were in the minority found affinity with each other, not over and against Hinduism, but because they were a minority. And if you didn't band together with other small groups and have relationships, you needed that mutuality of support. And finally, it's not too hard to welcome Muslims for Christians because, as El Farouk said, we have this common ancestor, Abraham, that we are all linked to. And that common family attachment means something. Again, my mother, she had 8 sisters. One of them had 13 children. I would go to weddings and funerals, and I wasn't sure who I was related to. And so, because I had all these cousins, I wasn't going to, speak ill of anybody or do anything I wasn't supposed to do. I would try to get along with folks because I didn't know, because eventually it would come back to my mom and I'd be in trouble. It's that same kind of thing with our relationships with Islam. We are related and we need to get along with each other because we are family. And so we cannot discount that connection, because I think in that connection through our common ancestor, Abraham, we have a point to begin conversation, and we have a point to foster good relationships. In terms of other reasons why we might want to consider good interfaith relations, there are 2 fantastic books that I've read in my time. One is from my undergrad, The Muslim Discovery of Europe by Bernard Lewis. If you have a chance to read that book, it's a fantastic account of European history from the 11th century onwards from a Muslim perspective. As most of Europe sat in the Dark Ages and crusades were happening, there was this emerging Islamic Renaissance where Europeans learned things from Muslim folks and back and forth. And so that interplay between the Western and the Eastern world that Lewis explores, it's absolutely fascinating. And you learn some things about where we've come from as a Western society from learning about Islamic history. The other book that is about interfaith relations is a book called The Dialogical Imperative by David Lockheed. David Lockheed was a professor of theology at Vancouver School of Theology, which is a United Church school. And in The Dialogical Imperative, David discusses his relationship with the United Church Buddhist dialogue. Now, he argues that we don't need to be any less Christian or any less Buddhist or any less anything to be able to come and sit and have a conversation, to be able to talk to each other, to be able to find some common ground where we can sit and get to know our neighbors. And in the book, he argues that we don't need to change anything about ourselves because the dialogue itself will change us. That divine spark, when different and disparate people get together and in love and respect have conversations about what matters to them, the Spirit is at work and we can foster common understanding. Because of my time with the Islamic community in Airdrie, a couple of years after that, I was invited to give a keynote at Calgary City Hall for Eid celebrations. And there were lots of folks there from the interfaith community in Calgary. There's a large interfaith coalition. And in fact, the food bank is run by the Interfaith Coalition, a coalition of various religions. And again, this conversation about sitting down respectfully and talking about things, I said, okay, well, I've got this burgeoning Islamic community in Airdrie. We've got a few Jewish families. How do we replicate what you did in Calgary? And they said, well, the first thing we did, we got together and we had some food from various cultures and religious traditions. And we started to talk about our holidays and our festivals and kind of the theology and the rationale behind them, why we do them. And so Christians talked about Easter and Christmas, and the Islamic folks talked about Ramadan and other festivals that they have. The Jewish folk talked about their festivals, and they got to know each other. and the emphasis on conversations about gathering with family, about loving your neighbor, and about, you know, just being together in community resonated across the board. And it allowed them to get to know each other so they could form a coalition and they could, you know, create the Calgary Interfaith Food Bank, and it built up trust. Relationships take time. We don't fix everything in one go. And we need to be able to have a little grace when things don't go right. Now, I don't know the Nigerian context, but I do know the Ukrainian one. And in seminary, I had occasion to visit the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul, which is a Uniate church. They're essentially Eastern Rite Catholics. So they have an Orthodox liturgy, but they swear allegiance to the Pope. And we got to this church, my work partner and I in seminary, and it was chock-a-block full. Like you couldn't get a seat. And then they had Eucharist, and they brought the kids up from the basement. And I'm not kidding you, there must have been like 250 kids who came up from the basement in this church in Saskatoon to be blessed by the priests. And so the next day we met with one of the priests from the church, and we said, "What's up? How do you have so many people? The liberal main line is dying, right? And we need to know what you're doing." And the priest said, "Well, it's about religion, yes, but it's more about culture for this particular congregation, right? The Ukrainian folks, they pass on the skills of embroidery, they pass on the skills of making delicious pierogies and cabbage rolls and all of the foods, the dance, all of the stuff that Ukrainian folks love is perpetuated through the community of the church." And that fascinated me. And I think in whatever cultural or religious context we come from, we can be distracted. We can be distracted about petty differences and slights and perceptions of power. Or we can go the other way and we can celebrate what is good about being Nigerian, about the commonalities that folks have, and leaving some of the tensions behind, especially as folks who are coming to a new country. You don't want to lose what makes you culturally whole and well, and that's good for your soul and your spirit. You don't want to lose that. And sometimes if you're distracted with interreligious squabbles, you forget the importance of maintaining your culture and passing that on to your kids so they know and understand various things that you know and you bring from your own country. And so that's why interfaith and ecumenical dialogues, relationships are so important. And that's why I hold fast to the principle of ecumenism. And I think it translates to interfaith work, is that those things that we can do together, we do them together and we do them well. On those things which we disagree and we can't, we disagree with respect and with grace. We don't need to seek reasons why. We can just know that there are some things that we cannot do together. And so I got a 5-minute warning about 3 minutes ago. And so I'll leave it there. I look forward to your questions. And I hope that from at least my perspective, I've brought a little bit of light as to why we need to be talking to each other constantly. And more importantly, having our hearts open. And again, as Wesley said, having them willing to be open and strangely warmed. So with that, I'll send it back to Bailey.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated that perspective, and can't wait for all of us to get to discuss more as well. So now I'm going to invite Chief Kenneth Durue to give his remarks, particularly on how this all relates to the context in Nigeria.
Thank you, Bailey. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this show. It's wonderful. And thank you, Lekon, for inviting me to be a part of this. And the discussion tonight is interfaith and the cultural harmony towards a global peace. And the case study, my case study will be on Nigeria. First of all, I was born in Nigeria, grew up there. My dad was a priest of the Anglican Communion. I grew up being the son of a priest, going to church, not knowing what other churches look like, actually, until I was about 18 years of age. And then I began to interact with other people. We have so many churches in my home. We have the Zion Methodist, we have the Catholic, we have so many Episcopals, you know. But then I began to realize that there are so many differences in all these churches that I've been to. I see that there is always a little thing different from the one that I went to before. And this intrigued my mind. Later on in life, I left Nigeria. I think in about 1996, I left Nigeria for Zimbabwe. That's the southern region of Africa. And it intrigues me to always go to a place of worship because of my upbringing. My dad was a priest. And in Zimbabwe also, I realized that the same thing that I was noticing in my home are also in churches in the southern region of Africa. I became a member of the Nigerian Christian movement. I was actually the secretary of the movement, and this brought me to so many churches. I traveled extensively within all the South African countries, South Africa, Lesotho, wherever it is, Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Mozambique. I've been to all these countries. And then in West Africa, I've been to Ghana and all these countries. I've been to all of them. And what I did was to begin to pay attention to the churches. And now I'm going to say a few things because I'm going to speak from my heart tonight. And I realized that there was a problem in the churches. And the problem was the introduction of religion into Africa by the white folks, the British guys that brought religion to us. And then I realized that what they brought was religion without Christ in it. They brought a government, their own government, through church. But the church that they brought had no Christ in it. It was just to rule. It was just to introduce the government in it. And this also made me begin to study more about the Bible. I became more interested in knowing the Bible. I actually took a degree course in theology and got the degree some time ago. I wanted to know how I can be of assistance. I wanted to know how I can make a difference in our society. So in 2000, I came to Canada because of the instability in Africa. From Zimbabwe, I came here with my wife, and we lived in Montreal. We live in Montreal up to today. And I have served in various capacities within the Nigerian Canadian Association. I have served as a secretary, public relations officer, treasurer, anything that you give me to foster our unity together. Now, let me take you back a little bit to Nigeria. The problem, and I want to thank Efaruk so much. Efaruk, thank you, brother, for the comments you made about Nigeria. I realize that you know what you're saying about Nigeria. The problem in Nigeria is politics and the church being put together. In 1967 in Nigeria, I was not born then, but this is a story that I heard my dad told me. And before the war, the Muslims and the Christians, which has been the biggest problem of Nigeria, had an issue. And this issue was of dominance, and actually brought about the Nigerian Biafra Civil War that lasted from 1967 to 1970, causing so many casualties. And from then till today, this problem has still remained. Nigeria being predominantly 50% Christians and 50% Muslims. From the north, Muslims; from the south, mostly Christians. Then the little bit of mix has been the issue. And then the other issue that Nigeria facing is ethnicities. The Hausas, the Igbos, the Yorubas, and other various about 250 ethnic groups in Nigeria, to be precise, and not having an understanding of what harmony is, not having an understanding of how to live together. everybody wants to promote their own beliefs and ideologies. Everybody wants to keep to their own policies and things that they have made for themselves, beliefs. And then when I begin to see these things, I realize that there is an issue. And so this discussion tonight, the importance of interfaith coming together, letting go of all these things, and also the intercultural harmony towards global peace, starting from Nigeria, because this is where it is at high stake. If somebody from the north cannot interact with somebody from the southeast, somebody from the southeast do not trust somebody from the southwest, there is no interaction. The church, the Catholic Church, and the Anglican Church, and the Pentecostal churches have no interaction. You stay on your own. I stay on my own. You promote your policies. I promote my policies. There is no communication. Everybody is doing what they deem fit to do. And so this subject brings me back to my home, how I started life, how things that I've seen. This is a story that I took an exam to Nigerian Defense Academy. And then I passed with flying colors, and my name was on the. So it took me about like 6 hours drive on a bus to go tell my parents that I have passed to go into the Nigerian Defense Academy, and I will be a full second lieutenant in the army when I finished my 5-year course. About a week after, when I have gathered all the money to come and pay, I came back to the school and my name was no longer on the board. It was removed, replaced by another name. This is a name from the north. I still remember that name till tomorrow, the name that was replaced with mine. I went, I searched, I made questions, I asked questions, I met people, I cried. And they told me that my name, I never took the exam, but I know I did. And I know that I passed. And I know that I had the paper to show that I passed. The guy took it from me and put it in his cupboard and told me that he's sorry, but he can't help me. Simply because I was from the south. And this person from the north could not give me that opportunity to serve in the Nigerian army. So that gave me this negative, I had a notion that it's negative in my heart towards the Northerners, But as time goes on and I started traveling and I started seeing things and I started visiting churches and I started studying the Word of God, there is something that came to my mind. And this is from the Bible. And this is where my job comes in, that God has made man in his own image. It did not say that God has made Muslims. It did not say that God has made Christians or Ikanka or Sadhguru Maharajis or any religion, but man in his own image. And that means that I, Kenneth, should be an instrument of inclusion. I should begin to promote. And so in Canada, where I live, I don't tell you that I am from the East or I am from the West. I tell you that I'm a Nigerian. The reason being that I should be that emblem to start this global harmony starting from Nigeria. Like I said before, the British came and to give us governance, to give us authority, to give us religion. And this is where the problem started. You see, the religion they brought their own church, and they introduced the church to Africans, to Nigerians, and they showed them that God said this, that you have to obey. God gave you this law, and you see here, it says, obey the law, obey the government. So my people, being naive in their own way at that time, we are ready to obey. And then these white guys, also white folks from Britain, also showed that they are purity. And us, Africans, Nigerians, are not very good with our skin color. And so it became a notion, a negative notion in the mindset of my people. And those people grew up and impacted that knowledge into the offsprings. And this has become the issue. And so today, this division that we have in Nigeria did not start with Nigerians, because before the British came, we already settled. We already have a government. We already have our own beliefs. We already have our own ideologies. But it was all changed when religion came to Nigeria, and this has become the problem that we face. And so how do we conquer this? How do we deal with this notion? How do we remove the negativities away from us and forge ahead as one people? And I like what Pastor Dave said right now, inclusion. You see, when you begin see Farouk as a Muslim and begin to see Pastor Dave as a Christian, and that is the problem. We can no longer continue to do that. Pastor Dave, when he was speaking, I heard him talk about his involvement with the Muslim people. And these are the people that I want to meet in my life, because seeing people who understands that God has made us all one people. It doesn't matter your sexual orientation. It doesn't matter your tribe or your culture, or whatever it is you that will tell yourself the truth that this is what God has made. And it is in the Bible. I haven't read the Quran before. So when Farouk was speaking about the Quran, I don't know nothing about the Quran, but I know about the Bible. And Jesus Christ also, when he came, he gave 2 laws that supersedes all other laws, that you should love your God above all things, and that you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. So now I ask my people when I meet them, I say, who is your neighbor? It might be the Muslim guy next to you. It might be the Christian guy. It might be it might be that person that is in need, that you don't know where he's coming from. His sexual orientation, his cultural backgrounds, his ethnicity, you don't know. And that is your neighbor. So as I begin to see these things, I am here to find an avenue to create a positive impact and for us to remove all these notions of this is my belief, this is my ideology, this is my religion, this is my culture. I want to keep my culture. I want to keep my beliefs, my religion, but also to realize that we are one people. And as long as we do not come together, as long as we do not put all these notions aside, we cannot move forward. There will be no global peace. Nigerian case study is so deep that the politicians in Nigeria are also the ones on top of the churches. So you see somebody who is filthy. I'm telling you, is like filthy. He commits all sorts of atrocities within the government, but then on Sunday morning, he is the one also in charge of the churches. People pay them so much respect. And so the pastors of these churches, knowing that these are the people that are bringing the finances to the church, have nothing to say. They accept them, they incorporate them into their religious system, and these are the ones now who have the final say.
I know, speaking.
That is from 5 to 6.
They're the ones who have the final say in the church affairs. So when you have a criminal, somebody who is stealing money from the government to promote his own personal agenda in the church, there's no way to move forward. And so, like, we are trying to find a way to have a global peace, is first of all to differentiate between churches and politics in Nigeria. Differentiate, put aside that I am Yoruba, or I am Igbo, or I am Hausa, or I am from one of the other ethnic groups in Nigeria, over 250. And this is destroying Nigeria because everybody is trying to keep to themselves. Now, my thing tonight is that as I want to thank Pollard again for organizing all this, but that we should take this message to the next level. I don't believe that I just want to say something and it stays there. When I was serving as the Secretary General of the Nigerian Christian Movement in South Africa, my job was to travel. And whenever I travel, I wanted to foster peace. I wanted to foster harmony. I wanted to show them that it's not about you being a Muslim. It's not about you being a Christian. It's not about being anything. It's about you knowing who you are and extending that love to the next person. And I think for Christians that I see this night, this is from a church. Our job is to begin to tell people that God has made us all. Tonight, I have met a brother from Ethiopia, and I'm going to meet him again. Tonight, I've met another brother, Pastor Dave. We're going to meet again sometime. We have a job to tell the people that what is happening in Nigeria is so devastating. It's so shameful that we need to put it aside and find a way to move ourselves forward. Now, there's something I want to talk about is from my heart. In Montreal here, that I live for the past 20-something years, there is still that differences being fostered here in Montreal. We have a body of an organization called the Nigerian Canadian Association, but then we also have the ethnic groups forming their own, one by one, trying to supersede the umbrella body. Now, nobody wants to deal with the Nigerian Canadian Association except first identifying with their ethnic group. And then you are in Canada, you have the Nigerian passport with you. When you leave Canada to another place, you disassociate yourself from Nigeria. The passport that you have traveled with is the Nigerian passport, no other passport. Because when you travel out of Nigeria or coming from Nigeria to Canada, you came with Nigerian passport. I know some of us are citizens, but still you identified as a Nigerian. But then within that, you are criticizing everything that Nigeria does. How can we move ahead? So this is the problem. As Nigeria being my case point, this is the problem that a time has come for us to understand that we have to put our differences aside. We have to put our ethnicities aside. We have to put religion aside. The time has come for us to understand that this is the time for us to show, to accept, to learn how to communicate, to create harmony within ourselves, and to show love. I think that the only way we can move forward right now is to show love. When you see your brother, anywhere you see him, you accept him as your brother. I know that we must have differences. I understand that, but with respect. Perhaps Farouk will say something that I don't agree with, but respectfully, I let him be. Perhaps Pastor David Pollard will say something that I don't agree with, but I have to respect his views because each and every one of us has a view. But then respecting people's views is also accepting them for who they are and for where they're coming from. Because you don't know my story unless I tell you. You wouldn't know his story unless he tells you. So how can you begin to criticize somebody that you don't even know his story? I have traveled and I have seen how people live differently. But there is something that touched me when I was in Kenya. That people there speak one language. So wherever you go, it is one language that you speak and you get whatever you want. I wish that we will all speak one language, a language of love, a language of understanding, a language of acceptance, a language to say, come, my brother, I have 2 shirts, and let's share one. Come, I have 2 shoes, take one, I take one. Come, you are my brother. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian. It doesn't matter if you're a Muslim. It doesn't matter if you belong to any religion. You have the right that God has given you to choose what to believe in. I don't know much what Farouk was saying because I've not had time to. I've been to mosque so many, but I don't understand. I go to weddings, I go to funerals because it's in a mosque. I have to go. I've been to so many churches, Catholic church, Pentecostal church, and it doesn't matter. It's one God that we serve. It's one people that God has made in this image. So I employ us tonight that as we sit together and find a way to have this global peace, we understand that it's all based on love and acceptance. You accept me, I accept you. And that's where I'm going to stop because I'm going to have some questions tonight on Nigeria because I know that Nigerians are sitting and participating in this forum. And so, Billy, thank you as I wait for the answers or questions.
Thank you so much. Before we go into a question period, I'm going to encourage people to go into gallery view if they would like. And can we please give our speakers a silent, because that would be probably a cacophony, but a big round of applause. Thank you so much for what we've heard from all of you, because it's been very, very rich and really, really great. So now we'll open it up for some questions for the rest of the evening. So if you have a question for all 3 of our speakers or any of them individually, you can either use the raise hand function on Zoom, and I will unmute you, or you can put a question into the chat, and I can relay that for you. Yeah, so I'm going to invite you to unmute admin because I think I see that you have a question.
Yeah, good evening, Belly.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my question goes to Imam Al-Farouk. Yeah, he made mention of some, and I want a clarification on that particular statement he made. He said there was no singular Islam. And for my own belief as a Muslim as well, I believe Muslim everywhere around the world, we have a singular way of praying, and we have a singular way, our beliefs. Like he said, Jesus Christ is our prophet, Holy Mary is our mother, and all other prophets in the Bible are also Islamic prophets, as written in the Quran. So when he said Islam is not a singular, so I want him to give an enlightenment on that particular. I know we have there's the denomination in Islam, we have the Shia and we have the Sunni, but coming to the worship of Islam, to my understanding, I know we worship in one particular way. So I want Imam to give us more insight on that when he said there's no singular Islam.
Sure.
Thank you.
I believe that the fundamental foundation of Islam is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. There is no God but one God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. If that is all that defined Islam, then Islam is a singularity. But that is not what continues to define Islam. And we find the division between Shia and Sunni right immediately upon the death of the Prophet. Even within the Sunni tradition, people put their hands differently during the Salat. Shia Salat is a little bit different. There are some small Muslim groups that do not say Salat and pray differently. And I'm not in a position to say that somebody is Muslim and somebody is not Muslim, that Allah is the only judge. And so certain interpretations, certain understandings, certain views of things are also different. How Islam may be practiced even in one home as to how they observe and how they practice differs from how it might be in your neighbor's home. And so this notion, I think this is where religious and spiritual abuse comes, that there is some rigid there's this religion is like this, and that all the practices and practitioners have to conform to some very tiny definition of what that religious practice is. Now, you made Chief Kenneth, you made a very profound statement for me when you reminded us that we're all made in God's image. I think the problem is that we make God in our image. And so we give God our prejudices, we give God our phobias, we give God our ignorance and our anger and our rage and our othering. So we create God in our own image. We're human beings. I think this is a universal issue, that we project what we think is our authenticity onto everybody else as their authenticity. If there was a singular Islam, then the Taliban would not exist. Then the people who were responsible for certain terrorist acts, for 9/11, for this and that, they would not. That's not my Islam. They claim to be Muslim. I am not judge. I am not Allah, right? So I've had enough people tell me that I'm not Muslim. I don't like takfiring other people. I can say that's not my interpretive choice of Islam. That is not the Islam I understand, but that's not my Islam. And that's what I mean. So I wanted to add, if I can, just also emphasizing the humanity, the love of humanity, or the love of creation. Allah in the Quran says, I am closer to you than your own jugular vein. And doesn't say, I'm closer to you, believers. Because Allah in the Quran speaks to Muslims, speaks to believers, and speaks to humanity. And there are different verses that actually address these different populations. Okay, so when Allah says, I'm closer to you than your own jugular vein, Allah is not talking to men. Allah is not talking to Nigerians. Allah is not talking to Muslims. Allah is talking to everybody. Nigerians and Tanzanians alike, trans people and non-binary people, and men and women and Muslims and non-believers alike, and Christians and Jews and Buddhists and everybody else. And that to me is the great equalizer, that the Creator, the divine, is as close to me as they are to anybody else and to everybody else. And for me, it doesn't stop at human beings either. So that's another conversation.
Thank you so much. Okay, Ajike, I'm going to invite you to speak. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. You have your hand raised, so I'm inviting you to unmute.
Ajike, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, you should be getting an invitation to unmute. If that's not working, you can also put your question in the chat. Maybe they stepped away for a minute. Are there any other questions that people have right now? If not, then I will ask one. So something that all of you have spoken to is sort of the need to really get to know each other and to kind of let go of the prejudices that we've had. And you've also talked about sort of encountering people who have these strong prejudices. And what I want to know is, do you have any sort of like advice or strategy that you use when you're kind of trying to encounter or engage with somebody who has a strong prejudice, either against you or someone like Reverend Dave, you were talking about sort of encountering other Christians who had these very strong prejudices, and what are strategies that you use in those situations?
You have to unmute him. He's still on mute. Pastor Dave is still on.
My apologies. I'm good now, I think. Okay. My apologies earlier for my daughter's interruption. Supper time and they're hungry, so I'm like, just wait, we'll feed you later. Anyhow, in terms of encountering folks who are openly hostile within my own tradition, I guess I yield to the wisdom of a Baptist preacher I know, who uses the line, you know, Jesus is Lord, and we all accept that for Christians. But however that plays out in your tradition, whether, you know, Jesus is, you know, the Son of God, or if Jesus is a prophet, or if Jesus is, you know, another thing to you, that works. But as long as we have some kind of common understanding that somewhere out there is this higher power, and we are in relationship with Christ, that I tend to operate on that level when I talk to other Christians and say, you know, we don't necessarily need to have some kind of purity test to love someone. We don't need to have them conform to our preconceived notions, you know, and I think for some of them, I really like to turn evangelical wisdom back on them. There's a wonderful book by Max Lucado, who's a devotional writer. He's a pastor in Texas. And in his book, Just Like Jesus, the opening line is, God loves you just as you are, but he wants you to be just like Jesus. He wants you to be kind, accepting, open. And so when I hear hostility coming from the Christian tradition against, you know, in particular Muslim folk, I remind them that, is this the way of Jesus? When, if you look at the Bible, when Jesus encounters someone other, whether it's the Samaritan woman at the well, or whether it's the woman who pulls out fine nard on his feet, you know, sometimes it takes some cajoling to get Jesus on board. But when he sees someone who is different, his immediate reaction is not to recoil, but to look at the possibilities to share God's love. And as gently as I can, I try to let folks know that that's what they should be doing. Sometimes I just have to hang up because, you know, there's no telling some people anything. But I would prefer to invite a relationship with the holy that is invitational and that doesn't automatically demand that someone conform to what I think in able to get to know them. So from my perspective with other Christians, and then when I encounter I've never encountered an Islamic person who was outright hostile to me as a pastor or to Christianity. I've always encountered a deep curiosity and a willingness to listen, but more importantly, to love. When I left Airdrie 5.5 years ago, I got more hugs from my Islamic brothers who'd gathered for prayer on my last day than I did from church folks. They, you know, so I've never understood that proclivity people have to just because they're different, we can't love them. I'll leave it at that. Hopefully that's helpful.
Can I say something briefly? Bailey, can I say something briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a question for all of you to answer.
Thank you. That is a very beautiful question, you know. There is this deeper understanding that I needed to have towards humanity. Whether you want to believe this or not, you are going to meet somebody who does not share your beliefs and ideologies. Whether you like it or not, you're going to meet somebody who is going to criticize your religion. There are people, whether you also like it or not, there are people who will be outright hostile to you. The question and the answer is, how do you handle these things? You see, I have tried to emphasize on love. And I think that love supersedes every other thing. I've met hostility, not once, not twice, so many times. And I like criticisms too, because when you criticize me, I want to learn something. I don't judge people, I want to learn from you. So when you attack my religion, or when you attack me as a person, when you attack my beliefs and my ideologies, I want to see your point, where you're coming from. Because whether you believe this or not, there is always a base for every attack. There is always a base for every question. There is always a base for every hostility. People have issues. And one thing I've realized dealing with people is that every person has a distinctive character. And you have to learn to understand that person from his point of view, from his character, from where he's coming from. So yes, I've met hostility, but out of those hostilities that I've met, I have come out a better person. Because I know that I let you talk. I let you remove that thing that is holding you down. I let you express yourself. Then I learn from you. Because in this race, whether you believe this again also, is that you are going to meet people who will be hostile to you. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian, it doesn't matter if you're a Muslim, a traditionalist, Buddha, Jew, it doesn't matter whatever it is. What matters is that you will meet them, but from that, come out a better person. Thank you.
What do I do in as a gay man, as a gay Muslim man, as a gay imam, I face a lot of hostility from Muslims who say that I cannot be, that I should not be, that I cannot be. I have encountered, of course, religious prejudice from non-Muslims, but sometimes the challenge is dealing with the rejection from within, which is greater. If people want to have civil conversation with the understanding that we agree to potentially disagree, that's one thing, but I'm not really interested in arguing or trying to convince somebody of the fullness of my humanity. That's not up for debate. Nobody's humanity is up for debate. So come to me with any religion, with any interpretation that somebody is less worthy or somebody is less human. I don't really want to engage that person anyway, because there's nothing that I can say that's going to shift that. That's a journey that they have to take for themselves. Allah in the Quran says, look around you, and do you still not believe? So look around you and look at the colors and look at the tapestry of not only humanity, but the world around us. And I don't really like engaging with hatred, and it's not really my job to unravel that for somebody. And I don't think that we can. That's opening your own heart, and only you can do that.
It's very well put. We can say what we are able to, but it's ultimately also up to other people to be able to change their minds. Or no, sorry, I meant to ask you to unmute, Ken, because I think you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, speakers. The question I have is actually going to go to the three speakers, because I quoted from your statements. First of all, I heard Hel Farouk Kaki said something which my friend, my fellow Nigerian, asked you a question about. You said Islam in Nigeria is different from Islam in Egypt, is different from Islam. So which means there is a difference in Islam. And when Chief Kenneth also was speaking, he said something. He said he has been to many churches, Catholic and Pentecostals, and he realized that there is a difference in Christianity in Nigeria and in other parts of the world. I'll pick a question from there. We have a Quran, only book for Islam, and we have Bible, only book for Christian. I think these books should be the manual which you're gonna use to run this religion. If those books are the true manuals which both religions believe in their different way, how come we find these differences? Do we find those differences in all those books? Or what is the genealogy of the difference that we find in all these religions? Another question now goes to Reverend David Pollard. He said something, he said, we have same Abrahamic belief and we are related and we are of the same family. He was referring to the Christian and the Muslim. If we say we have the same belief, we are the same family and we are related, how come we have religious conflicts around the world today? Even not only around the world, even in different cities, in different nations, we find that religious difference. If we are family, if you say we are same family and we are related and we have similar beliefs, how come we still battling with this differences across the world, which is eventually translating to terrorism today? Those are the questions that goes to three of you.
I will. Farouk, can I speak first? All right. Thank you, Leko, for that question. If the Bible, if the Quran is the foundation of, why then are we having all these differences? It's all about understanding, bro. And it's all about approach. I went to a church where a message was preached. And this message was given by somebody else, and then somebody else delivered that message to people, other people. You see, many people have read the Bible without an understanding of what the Bible is all about. People have preached on the word that were not given to them. And I tell you that people are being deceived today in Nigeria, that where I come from. The word of God has been twisted and has been changed so much that it becomes a personal thing that somebody's using to get something from other people. Now, let me take you to a book in the Bible, the book of Malachi, a prophet. Now, this guy was speaking on people giving to help feed the poor, feed those who are in need, feed the pastors also, because they were not allowed to do anything but to help people with their problems and pray for them and heal them. Nigerian churches today have twisted the same chapter of the Bible for their own personal benefits. So you see, when somebody speaks this message to you to benefit himself, you take the message to the next person to benefit yourself. It starts growing like that, but then it's negative. People don't know the real message. So understanding the Bible is one thing, and then saying the message. I want you to know something, that some people preach the word of God not knowing who God is. They have no encounter with Jesus Christ, our Lord and our Savior. They have no encounter with God, but they go out there. It is only in Nigeria today that you will see somebody who has no job, but the only job that he has now is that he tells he has a calling to be a pastor. And within a year, he's rich. Because he's trying to enrich himself, not the message of Christ or God to the people. When I went to South Africa, I was in Johannesburg, I was in Cape Town, Bloemfontein, all this, Port Elizabeth. I went to a Catholic church and I went to an Anglican church, and I realized that every Sunday they did the same thing, giving the Holy Communion. It doesn't matter if it's Catholic or Anglican. I was paying attention. But in Nigeria, the Catholics do differently every Sunday. The Anglican says only once every first Sunday of the month. The difference is so crystal clear that I begin to ask questions. Why? Now another thing in Nigeria that I noticed is that somebody from this church, the son or the daughter is not allowed to marry from the next church, next door, because they don't share the same belief. They don't share the same ideologies. They don't share the same policy. They have different policies for themselves. So you see, the Bible may be the word of God, yes, but the message that the people are giving to the world is not what is in the Bible. It's for their own personal gains. And this is what I've noticed in Nigeria, and Nigeria being my case study. Today, we have church in at least 10 churches in every street. In my state, in Imo State, in Lagos State, we have churches in every street of Lagos. Now, if we have all these churches in Nigeria, in every state in Nigeria, there are so many churches, why is there so much crime? Why is there so much violence? Where is there so much atrocities going on? Because the message is not what is being given. It's not the message of God. They have twisted the message. They have changed the whole thing for their own personal benefits. So it's the understanding of the word of God that matters and how you present it to the people. Thank you.
If I can jump in on that, we all have interpretive choice. And if you read Shakespeare, you will understand it differently than somebody else will. It's the same thing with our holy texts. The same Bible that is affirmed in this church, which is hosting this event, is the same Bible that justified apartheid in South Africa. Right? The same Islam that that teaches one thing is also, that same book is the same book that is used by groups like the Taliban or others to commit atrocities. The exact same book that taught me pluralism and spiritual and religious diversity is the same book that is used. So we come to our text and our religions with our experiences, with our understandings, and also our limitations and our prejudices. So the book doesn't exist, the text doesn't exist in a limbo or in a vacuum. It exists within our lived experiences and our hearts, and what our heart holds is also how then is also part of that interpretive choice. So I don't think it's that easy.
So I'll check in because Al Farouk, are you done, my friend?
I think so. It's been a long day. I'm tired.
Okay. Well, it's a really excellent question, because the whole idea of family, I like to use that term. But when we talk about family, I've done enough work with a variety of people to know that family's not always easy. I'm an Albertan, and I have a huge swath of family who self-identify as rednecks. They are nice enough people, but some of their rhetoric on social media, some of their conversations are homophobic and racist. They're family. Those are people who are related to me by blood. In the same way, when we talk about, religious conflict or interfaith conflict, we often, certainly from my perspective as a Caucasian white person, Canadian, people who are culturally similar to me point to radicalization of Islamic folk. But there's a wonderful verse that Jesus has that says, don't point out the speck in your neighbor's eye without first pointing or pulling the log out of your own. And so it would do us good as Christians, I think, to look around the world, and in particular to our friends in the South, to see how Christianity has been radicalized and pushing extremes and trying to create some kind of religious hegemony that just isn't there. And so that's where the religious conflict comes. We have this family, but we haven't learned enough about the family system to be able to speak lovingly into the dysfunction, because every family is dysfunctional. And I mean, if you look at what Abraham did to Isaac, no wonder there's dysfunction, right? And so we have to get past, sorry, Abraham did to Ishmael. So as long as we get past that, as long as we can find a way to be able to understand and know that family is not always perfect, but we are related, and use that as a jumping off point. Because, as even my own dad, he would tell off-color jokes and speak in ways that, here I am 30 years later thinking, my dad spoke in racist terms, and maybe was, right? That's hard to deal with as a as a Canadian. But I think if we all look at it, I think that it's there. It's true. Years ago, I worked with United Church Camps, and we did some Indigenous interrelationship, and had youth counselors come from reserves around the camp. and elders to come and teach us some of indigenous traditions. And I sat with a board member who said, well, you got to watch those native boys around 12, 13 years old. You got to be careful with them. I reflected on that with Annette McKay, who's the daughter of Stan McKay, a former moderator in that church when she was in Saskatoon. And I said, I don't want to call her racist. And she said, why not? Because it was, right? And so we are very tentative about naming elephants in rooms. But I think the job of especially clergy and leaders in faiths, we need to be able to speak the truth. And if we're not, we're doing God a disservice. And so that's a very convoluted way of looking at that idea of interreligious conflict and why it exists, right? Because families are dysfunctional, and we sometimes don't know enough about the cousins. Again, as I said before, I've got 13 of them. I don't even know all their names. So there you go.
Thank you, all of you. So I think we have time for one more question, and I know that Reverend Sean had a question, and that's the only hand I see. So we will end with one last question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for everyone for participating and being here this evening. I'm the minister of Beaconsfield United Church, and I have a question for all three speakers or four speakers that we've heard from around LGBTQ leadership towards intercultural understandings. I'm gay myself. We are an LGBT very positive congregation and community, and do a lot of extensive work in the LGBT community in the West Island of where we are. So I'm just wondering, how do you find, or do you find, or is that your experience, that the issues that are confronted in the LGBT community, and which are largely issues that have been confronted by women before us, how are they leading us in a new world, toward a new world? And how do we meet on the roads and pathways, the great red road towards the horizon of the future? How's that? I'm sorry if that might be a bit.
Ask your question again.
Well, where are the LGBT, in terms of LGBTQ community leadership in the world today, how do you understand that as advancing many of the causes around peace and human rights and all the advances that we're seeing and the things that we're up against?
I can start with that from my perspective. I think your linkage between place of women in the religious forum is intrinsically tied to the inclusion of queer folk, because I think queer and trans folk, because I think that misogyny, sexism, homophobia, transphobia are flip sides of the same coin, and this coin is in a constant spin because of patriarchy. So the Unity Mosque is a space that I have helped establish, and that I help maintain, and that which continues to also impact on other spaces and hopefully other mosque type spaces around the world. The two aspects around gender and sexual orientation or gender identity are intrinsically linked. So we are a gender equal, non-segregated, LGBTIQ affirming mosque space. A lot of folks in the Muslim communities who are not our fans will often relegate us to as the gay mosque. But what the reality is that that 50% of my in real life and online congregation are actually not queer or trans identified, but are actually straight folk, many of whom are in that space because it is queer affirming, right? And the queer affirming space has also opened up for people of all orientations and all genders, women as imams, as prayer leaders, as khatibs, of Shias and Sunnis and non-denominational Muslims like myself, all praying together, with including all seekers, all people of good heart who wish to join. And so it breaks down not only barriers of otherness, but it has actually opened up. My husband and I were in Ottawa last month, and we were visiting with some folks that are part of the Unity Mosque in Ottawa. And one of the women who was there said, "Thank you for opening this space up and giving Islam back to us." This is a heterosexual woman in her 70s. And so I think that queer folk, and one of the very active members of my congregation is a trans woman. She lives in America. She's of Bengali origin, and she's a Hafiz-e Quran. She has the entire Quran memorized by heart. She did that in America, not in some other country, but right in America. And she always reminds me that queer and trans folks are a gift. We are the shamans, we are the artists, we are the innovators. And I think now is actually the time when we can bring some of that openly into a religious and spiritual discourse. And I think that's part of the ongoing gift. I don't know whether that answers your question, Sean. But I see that as our role and our place as we move forward into breaking down otherness. And I think in a lot of religious traditions, rightfully or wrongfully, sex and sexuality are stigmatized. And so when we start to break that down too, we open ourselves up to the full beauty in creation, rather than an apartheid of narratives.
And if I may say something, Sean, I think that inclusiveness here is the key point. You know, when you are out for global peace, you cannot segregate anymore. You cannot say this is this, this is that. You know, this is the problem that we're facing. We are still in that further where we categorize, where we separate, where we classify, where we give social standing to some people. And the time has come for us to let that go. I have read the New Testament Bible, and over again, the story of Jesus, the things that he did, what we are doing today. I'm trying to see where he condemned anybody because of your gender orientation, or gender identity or sexual orientation. I'm trying to see, if I have to be like him, if I have to worship him, if I have to follow in his footsteps, did I see him condemn somebody? No, he did not. He tells you, don't do this again, for your own good. The man at the brooks of well, where he healed him, he said, don't do it again, because if you do it again, you might get something worse. But did he go outright to condemn anybody in their way of life? No, he did not. He didn't do that. So if we are trying to find harmony, if we are trying to find peace in the world, we will begin to include things the way they are. I struggled. I have to make a confession. Growing up, coming from Nigeria, I struggled to understand gay. I struggled with that because of my cultural backgrounds. But then when I began to study and I do researches, I realized that what matters is the love that God has on us, his creation. So who am I? if I have my own shortcomings, if I have my things that I do wrong in my own way, who am I to judge this person? You see, this is the thing. When we stop judging, when we stop looking at the person, when we start doing what Pastor Dave just said now, removing the speck in your eye first before you see the speck in Lacon's eyes, then you begin to understand. So for me, it's all about inclusiveness now. For me, it's all about showing love, extending the love of Christ to the next person. Thank you.
So I think if we want to look at the question of, what can we learn from the LGBTQ community and their leadership in relation to global peace and justice, I think there are two big things that I see coming out of that movement. And the first one is bravery. LGBTQ leadership speaks bravely and boldly. At a mentored ministry, tell me you need to do three things. You need to be clear, you need to be direct, you need to ask for what you need. And with great bravery, various LGBTQ organizations mention that. I serve in the buckle of the Bible Belt in this country. You don't get much more Christian conservative than dealing in southeastern Alberta. And yet there is a queer community here that seems to, if they're Christians, want to be part of the church that I serve. And indeed, we have a couple of trans high school youth who are part of our congregation and offer us wonderful youthful leadership. They're extremely brave to walk out the door and go to school in the morning. And the other piece along with that is they're persistent. They have been taught and they know who they are, and they have allies, and they're going to be who they are. And they're going to, it's like that old 90s song by Chumbawamba, I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're not going to keep me down. Those two things, the ability to speak bravely and the ability to persist, that emerge out of the LGBTQ movement are of paramount importance when we think about global peace and global justice and interfaith work. Because if ever there was work that needed bravery and persistence, it is that work. And so that is a great gift that comes out of leadership of a variety of LGBTQ organizations and folks on the spectrum of gender identity and with a variety of orientations. So as I think about that question, those are the two things, bravery and persistence.
Thank you so much, all of you. So we're coming to the end of our time. So I just want to thank you all again for what you've shared with us tonight, and thank everybody for being here. I think we've started a really excellent conversation, and I, for one, really look forward to being able to continue this conversation in our community, and each of us being able to continue these conversations in our own communities in the future. So I know that we didn't necessarily get to every single question that people might have had to ask, and I am sorry about that, but I invite us to just carry these conversations and reflections forward, because this is important work for all of us to be doing in our own circles. And now, just to close us out, I will turn us over to Liken for some final closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Bailey. But I think Mustafa is here, if I'm right. If he's not, then Mustafa, are you there?
Maybe raise your hand if you're here.
Yeah, I think he's here. I think I saw him.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry,
over to you. Yeah.
First of all, let me say a very big thank you to every one of us that was present tonight on this wonderful evening. To my Nigerian brother, happy independence. Our guest speaker, I would like to say a very wonderful thank you for all of you from Imam El Farouk, Kaki, Reverend David Pollard, and Chief Kenneth Durue. Thank you for your inspirational thoughts. I think every one of us will learn one or two things in your word. I would also like to say a very big thank to the Beaconsfield Church United for putting us together for the past few weeks for organizing this seminar. And my gratitude go to Bailey. You've been up and down to assist for a successful outing. And to my committee member, thank you very much. I would also like to thank the Montreal meeting, Montreal City Mission. My particular greetings go to Reverend Pauline. She, even in her vacation, she has been communicating with us to make sure this was a successful function. And I also like to say a very big thank you to our audience who find time on this tight schedule to attend this meeting. Some of us are back in Nigeria. We know the time difference, 6 hours. So I'll say thank you to every one of you. I think we all heard our speakers. They've all speak in all dimensions of life. I think the best thing for us is now to utilize all what they said in our daily uses. I will also thank you to every one of you and have a wonderful night. Thank you.